The 100 billion trade bombshell. What if I told you the United States could wake up one morning and owe 100 billion overnight? Not to Wall Street, but to the world. Numbers in politics are often abstract. Billions are mentioned casually, trillions appear in headlines, and most people tune out because the scale feels too distant. But every so often a figure emerges that cuts through the noise. One so large and dramatic that it forces people to stop and pay attention. One such figure is $100 billion. That is the amount the United States could potentially owe after a tariff ruling that has shaken Washington and Wall Street alike.
Many countries have. They've ripped us off left and right. But now it's our turn to do the ripping.
The idea that the United States might face such a colossal financial penalty sounds almost unbelievable. Yet the case is real. It involves international trade, global law, and a system that most people never think about: the dispute panels of the World Trade Organization and other legal channels for tariff challenges. This is not only about numbers, it is about credibility, power, and the very foundation of America's role in global commerce. Few creators on YouTube have dug deeply into this story. Yet if the worst-case scenario materializes, it could reshape the global economy. If the US really owes $100 billion, the fallout won't just hit Washington. It will hit your job, your wallet, and the price of everything you buy. So let us unpack what is happening, how the United States got here, and why the figure of $100 billion is not just a headline but a warning. The origins of the dispute. The case goes back to tariffs imposed during the Trump administration. In an effort to protect American industries and punish China for unfair practices, Washington placed sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods. These were not small measures. Billions of dollars worth of products, from steel to electronics, were targeted.
Don't let some of these politicians go around saying, because I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything, sir. The happiest people in the world would be China. They wouldn't be paying 104%. I tell you, they'd be paying no percent. We'd be paying them 104%.
China responded with its own counter-tariffs, escalating into what became known as the US-China trade war. While many Americans saw this as a domestic policy choice, it was also subject to international law. Under the rules of the World Trade Organization, member countries are not supposed to impose tariffs unilaterally without proper justification. China challenged the U.S. tariffs at the WTO, and panels ruled that many of them violated international trade rules.
This is China's third WTO action against U.S. tariffs, and they claim that this latest action by the U.S. violates consensus reached between both countries to not impose additional tariffs.
The United States largely ignored these rulings, insisting that the tariffs were necessary for national security and economic fairness. But here's the problem. When the world's biggest economy starts ignoring the very rules it created, the entire system begins to crack. How the 100 billion figure emerged. The figure of $100 billion comes from the potential scale of damages if the United States is found liable for illegal tariffs, and China, or other affected countries, are authorized to impose penalties or demand compensation. In international trade disputes, the aggrieved party can be allowed to retaliate by imposing tariffs of its own equal to the amount of harm suffered. In theory, if Washington is found to have unfairly collected tens of billions in tariffs, the other side can retaliate with measures of equal or greater value. Over time, the damages can accumulate. Experts estimate that between lost trade, retaliatory measures, and possible compensation, the figure could reach $100 billion. $100 billion isn't just a fine. It's a ticking time bomb hanging over the global economy. That number is not guaranteed, but it is plausible enough to rattle policymakers. Why this matters for America? The idea of owing $100 billion is dramatic enough on its own. But the deeper issue is what it says about American power. For decades, the United States has been the architect of the global trade system. It helped design the WTO and insisted that other countries follow its rules. Now imagine the architect of the system being caught breaking its own rules. What happens when the referee is also the cheater? If Washington now ignores those rules when they are inconvenient, the credibility of the entire system collapses.
And beyond at this hour, where the World Trade Organization has waded into the middle of the US-China trade war, the WTO, interestingly, has sided with China, ruling that the United States violates global trade rules with the tariffs that have been imposed by President Donald Trump.
For other countries, this is an opportunity. China in particular can claim that it is the United States, not Beijing, that undermines free trade. That narrative damages Washington's ability to rally allies. If America owes massive damages but refuses to pay, the global order could fracture further. The political drama at home. At home, the tariff ruling has become a political football.
They're manipulating their currency today as an offset against the tariffs. Not supposed to do that. The game isn't supposed to be played that way.
Some argue that the tariffs were essential to protect American jobs and industries, regardless of what international law says. Others warn that the costs of defying the WTO could far outweigh the benefits. This creates a dilemma for U.S. leaders. Paying damages or rolling back tariffs could be framed as weakness, especially in the middle of a heated election cycle. But ignoring the ruling could escalate into a trade war far larger than before, one that threatens the entire global economy. Here's the nightmare. No matter what America does next, the choice could blow up in its face. Either way, the decision is politically explosive. Global repercussions. If the United States truly owes $100 billion, the effects will ripple worldwide. Global markets depend on the stability of American trade policy. A major dispute of this scale could push companies to rethink supply chains, investors to move money, and allies to question Washington's reliability. For China, the ruling is a gift. Beijing can present itself as the defender of international rules, even as it continues its own controversial practices. For Europe, the case is a warning. If Washington can ignore trade law when it wants, then Europe may need to protect its own industries more aggressively. That could mean new tariffs, new disputes, and a breakdown of global free trade. The broader question: can the U.S. afford this? $100 billion is not enough to bankrupt the United States on its own. America's economy is massive and the federal budget runs into the trillions. But the symbolism of owing that much is staggering. It raises questions about the sustainability of U.S. trade policy. It also risks damaging the dollar's position as the world's reserve currency. If America refuses to pay, it's not just money on the line. It's the future of the dollar itself. If countries begin to believe that Washington will not respect trade rulings, they may look for alternatives, whether in new institutions, bilateral agreements, or even shifting away from the dollar in trade settlements. That would strike at the very foundation of American economic dominance. Why few are talking about it? One reason this story has not gone viral is that trade law is complex. Tariffs, rulings, panels, these are not as exciting as headlines about wars or scandals. But make no mistake, the consequences are enormous. Trade disputes shape jobs, prices, and global power. Another reason is that both Washington and Beijing are cautious about inflaming the issue too publicly. The U.S. does not want to admit vulnerability, while China prefers to use the ruling strategically rather than triumphantly. That leaves the story simmering beneath the surface, critical but underreported. Historical parallels. This is not the first time America has faced international trade penalties. In the early 2000s, the United States lost WTO cases over steel tariffs imposed by the Bush administration. At the time, the penalties were smaller and Washington eventually backed down. What makes the current situation different is the scale. The global economy is more interdependent, the US-China rivalry is far sharper, and the potential damages are far larger. This could be the biggest trade penalty in history, and it's aimed squarely at the United States, the future of trade wars. The larger question is whether this ruling marks the beginning of a new era of global trade wars. If the United States refuses to comply, other countries may follow suit. That could mean the breakdown of the WTO as an arbiter of disputes. In its place, the world could return to raw power politics, where the strongest economies impose rules unilaterally. For businesses and consumers, that would mean higher costs, greater uncertainty, and disrupted supply chains. For governments, it would mean more conflict and less cooperation. And here's the most chilling part. This isn't just about tariffs. It's about whether the entire world order is about to unravel. The $100 billion figure is not only about money. It is about the potential collapse of a system that has kept global trade relatively stable for decades. Possible outcomes. So what could happen next? There are three main scenarios. First scenario, the United States negotiates with China and other countries, reducing the damages through compromise. This would be the most stabilizing outcome, but it would require political courage in Washington. Second scenario, the United States ignores the ruling and China retaliates with massive tariffs of its own. This would escalate tensions and could trigger a broader trade war. Third scenario, the U.S. pays part of the damages, but maintains some tariffs, trying to balance domestic politics with international credibility. This middle path is possible, but would still leave wounds in the global system. The phrase $100 billion is not just a number. It is a symbol of how fragile the global trade system has become. A tariff ruling that could, in theory, bankrupt America's credibility is not simply about economics. It is about power, reputation, and the rules that govern the international order. If America can't, or won't, pay this bill, the world may never look at U.S. power the same way again. For the United States, this is a moment of choice. Will it honor the system it helped build, or will it defy it and risk collapsing the very structure of global trade? For China, it is a chance to frame itself as the defender of rules against an unpredictable rival. For the rest of the world, it is a warning: the stability of global commerce is no longer guaranteed. The story has not yet gone viral, but it should. Because if America truly faces a bill of $100 billion, the entire world will feel the consequences.